Yeah. Come on. Hey, yeah. Come on. Our knees don't bend like they used to do. Roller coasters, man, we're through, but we're alive and we're free. Got the open road, just waiting to see. We don't need the thrills, we got what we feel. Rock, rock, rockin' in retirement. Cruise, cruise, living like we mean it. Sand between our toes and the wind in our face. Rock, rock, we own this place. Yeah. Barefoot walking down.
See this red brick building off in the distance over there? It's not that far. That's the back of the building. We're going to go to the front of the building, and just around that building is where your train is. So we're going to make our way over there. We'll take our time just to make sure that we keep everybody together. Very short walk, so maybe not even 10 minutes. So look for this yellow shirt, and we'll be all together. All right, guys.
last time. He had a funny view, I remember that. He was driving there with the kids. Train in front of us. The other one, he keeps moving. These are the ones coming. Oh, told you kind of big.
Oh, what kind of sad? Yeah, like one time somebody said, "How you guys tackle this?" I get in my car with the car and I get
You okay? Sit anywhere?
Have a seat wherever you like, yes.
Hi folks, welcome. Yes, this is your chair and have a seat wherever you like. Right, folks, yes, we can put the chair right in the back here. Keep it with us. I love to believe that Mallory Square was really named for the matriarch of the family, Helen Mallory, but most people will tell you that it was named for one of her sons, Stephen Mallory. But Stephen Mallory ended up being a secretary in the Confederate Navy during the Civil War. Most people don't realize, though, that during the Civil War, Key West was very much a Union stronghold. If you wanted to fight for the South, you had to go north. All right, folks, yeah, just a few safety things before we head on out. Please remain seated while the train is in motion. We don't want you to make an untimely exit out the side. That never works out super well. Arms, heads, hands, legs, etc. Everything inside the train cars at all times. We have low-hanging tree branches, low-flying chickens. Everything is very close, especially delivery trucks. We got really narrow streets. Delivery trucks end up getting very close. So approaching a truck, I'll try to remind you, put your arms inside. You don't want to be Alright folks, departing Mallory Square, looking to our right, you see this brick building. We call that building Building Number 1, as that was the first masonry structure built on the old Navy base. It opened in 1852 as a coaling depot for steamships. The second story up there was a sailmaker's loft. It was right here in 1898 where the USS Maine was loaded with its last batch of coal before sailing to Havana Harbor and mysteriously exploding. That was the beginning of the Spanish-American War. Remember the Maine. All right, on our right, you see this beautiful tall red brick structure we passed by on the way to the train. That is the old Customs House. We also call it Old 91, as it was built in 1891. After a 9-year, $9 million restoration, that's now the Key West Art and Historical Society's Museum of Art and History. Now, as you pass by, folks, if you can see up to the roof, maybe between the two trolleys here on our right, you might be able to make out some very tall, very sloped individual roofs. Those are called snow roofs. They were federally mandated at the time the building was built so that snow would not accumulate on that roof and collapse it. Folks, I have lived in Key West now for 12 years myself. I've never seen a single snowflake on that roof. I guess it's doing its job. Through this intersection on the right, see the building right there with the very large blue door shutters? That is the Mel Fisher Maritime Museum. Inside that museum, there are treasures recovered from two Spanish galleons, the Atocha and the Santa Margarita. They both sank off the coast of the Florida Keys in 1622 due to a hurricane. Now, Mel Fisher was a treasure hunter. He spent 16 years searching for those two galleons. Every morning he would tell his crew, "Today's the day." Well, on July 20th of 1985, those words finally came true. The treasure recovered from those two galleons today amounts to more than $400 million. And folks, they say the mother lode is still out there if anyone wants to give it a go. Coming up on our right, you see two white structures. These are the presidential gates. They were built in 1906. They are only open for sitting and former U.S. presidents when they visit Key West. To date, that would include William Howard Taft, certainly Harry Truman, Kennedy, Eisenhower, Carter, and Clinton. The pathway next to the presidential gate leads to the Truman Little White House. President Harry S. Truman spent 11 working vacations of his presidency here in Key West, a total of 175 days. Yeah, folks, Harry Truman came to Key West under doctor's orders. His doctor said to him, get yourself into some warmer weather. Included with those doctor's orders, a shot of bourbon every morning. True story, shot of bourbon. Doctor's orders. All right, through this next intersection, looking to our right through the trees, you see a red brick building. That is our post office. But if it looks a little familiar, that's because it was designed to look like a Civil War fort. Designed by a man by the name of Sonny McCoy. Sonny McCoy was a 5-term Key West mayor. Every time he was up for re-election, he pulled a crazy publicity stunt. Most recently, he rode one water ski between Key West and Havana, Cuba. Took him a little over 6 hours, but he ended up in the Guinness Book of World Records. Through our next intersection on our right, see the green sign on the corner. It reads Mile Zero. That is mile marker 0. The intersection we are heading through is the beginning and the end of Route US 1 in and out of Key West. It's about 2,300 miles or so between Key West and Fort Kent, Maine, right before you cross into Canada. Now that sign, Mile Zero, not only the most photographed sign here, but it is also the most stolen. Which, yes, is kind of ridiculous because, you know, you can find those signs in nearly every store on this island, including, guess what, the store right across the street from the sign itself. But, you know, I guess the kids want the real one, so they take it in the middle of the night. It happens a few times a year. The intersection we are approaching next is Angela Street. Once we cross Angela, look to the right, you'll see a quite beautiful church. And yeah, Angela Street. You'll find that we have a great number of female street names here in Key West. Most of them were siblings or children of one of our quote-unquote founding fathers of Key West, John Whitehead. You'll hear about those founding fathers a few times along your tour. We are now traveling along Whitehead Street. But on our right is the Sandy Cornish Memorial AME Zion Church. Sandy Cornish was a slave from up in Baltimore, Maryland in the 1850s, a very industrious guy. He was able to purchase his way out of slavery, not only his own but also that of his wife, Lilla. They made their way down here to Key West and they became very successful farmers on this island. That's not something easy to do on a chunk of coral. Very renowned citizens, they named the church in honor of him, Sandy Cornish. The intersection we are crossing next is Petronia Street. Petronia Street is the heart of Bahama Village. The neighborhood behind the Southernmost restaurant to our right is Bahama Village. In the mid-1800s, this island had a huge influx of Bahamian immigrants, most of West African descent. They came here to work in our 3 main industries at the time: shipwrecking, tobacco, and sponging. Now, none of those 3 industries still exist on this island today. You'll hear about what happened to those industries along your tour, but some of the descendants of the original settlers of Bahama Village still live in that neighborhood today. Through this next intersection on our left, see the long red brick wall. Behind the wall is, yes, the former residence of Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway lived in Key West for 9 years with his second wife, Pauline. The house was built in 1851 by Asa Pitt, prominent shipwrecker of Key West. It was purchased in 1931 by Pauline's uncle Gus. He spent $8,000 for it at a tax sale. Gave it to the Hemingways as a wedding present. That's a pretty nice gift. Open every day till 5 p.m. And folks, the red brick wall on the left, said to have been built by Hemingway's own 2 hands, and by the looks of it, he did it when he got home from Sloppy Joe's. On our right, the Key West Lighthouse. 88 steps to the top of the lighthouse, like a piano. Now, that's not the original lighthouse of Key West. That one there dates from 1847. The original lighthouse was destroyed by a hurricane in 1846. It was located, if you look straight ahead, all the way to the end of the street in front of us. Well, folks, normally you would see that concrete buoy all the way down there. It was located in what is now the Southernmost Point. Well, folks, that concrete buoy, and especially the seawall behind it, are now being refurbished. So if you came all the way to Key West and really wanted that photo next to that concrete buoy, 90 miles to Cuba, there's an exact replica. Half a block to the left of the Southernmost Point, all the way at the end of Duval Street, in the Duval Street Pocket Park. Get your photo right there. No one will be any the wiser. The neighborhood we've now entered is known as Gatto Village, named for renowned cigar manufacturer Eduardo Gatto. At one time, there were 166 cigar factories on this little island. Eduardo Gatto wanted to make sure that his employees remained happy and working for him. How did he do that? He built them a house. Now, there is a pretty nice boss. Folks, since the year 1823, the U.S. Navy has had a presence on the island of Key West. At the moment, there are 3 active military bases on this island, but the Navy arrived in 1823 with Commodore Porter. Porter arrived here to combat the burgeoning problem of piracy in the Florida Keys. Porter arrived here to fight the pirates of the Caribbean. Arr. On our right, you see a very sturdy-looking black metal fence. Behind the fence is the Truman Annex of our Naval Air Station. The Truman Annex is a housing facility and communication center for the U.S. Navy. The Naval Air Station itself is really located 7 miles up the Keys on Boca Chica Key. It is a Top Gun flight school. They train fighter pilots in dogfights, and when they are out on maneuvers, you know it, the skies over Key West get quite thunderous. Once we reach the end of this block, looking to our right, you'll see one of my absolute favorite attractions on this island. Across the parking lot, on our right, the Key West Butterfly and Nature Conservatory. Inside the large glass atrium off the back, there are hundreds of free-flying butterflies, also 20 species of exotic birds, 2 of them a mated pair of pink flamingos. Their names are Red and Scarlet. That atrium is open every day till 4:30. Their gift shop open every day till 5:30. It is equally as beautiful. Turning now on to world-famous Duval Street. Entering what always has been, what still remains to be quite a Cuban neighborhood on this island. In the mid-1800s, this island also had a huge influx of Cuban immigrants who came here to work in our cigar manufacturing industry. That industry began here in the year 1824 when an Englishman by the name of William Wall got shipwrecked here. Took a look around, realized he could create an industry. He started to import loose-leaf Cuban tobacco. Not only the tobacco, he imported people who could roll the tobacco into cigars. That industry in full swing on this island until the Great Fire of 1886. You'll hear about that fire a few times along your tour. That fire destroyed most of our cigar factories. On our right, see a blue awning that reads La Ida. These days it is a hotel, a restaurant. They've got a cabaret on the 2nd floor. But La Ida really stands for La Terraza de Marti, the Terrace of Marti. Cuban patriot Jose Marti gave rallying speeches for his followers on that 2nd-story balcony. Jose Marti was known as George Washington of Cuban independence. 2 twin white buildings on the left, that is the old Cuban Social Club established here in the year 1900. As I mentioned in the 1800s, this island also had a huge influx of Cuban immigrants who came to work in that cigar manufacturing industry. Well, they established the Cuban Social Club. Inside the Social Club, they had access to health care, educational programs, and certainly social events. They say the greatest for President Harry S. Truman. Again, 11 working vacations of his presidency he spent here in Key West. We have a number of streets here named for presidents that visited and spent some time. Besides Truman, we have Kennedy, Eisenhower, and Roosevelt. President Kennedy visited Key West twice, once during the Bay of Pigs invasion, once during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Here we are on Truman Avenue. We just want to traverse before we see our next site. But that's our next stoplight. Looking to the right, there is a long stone wall. And behind the wall is a complex of buildings known as the Basilica of St. Mary, Star of the Sea. Star of the Sea, while our Cuban neighbors think of the island of Key West as Stella Maris. That translates to Star of the Sea. And yes, it's a complex of buildings. Behind the wall, you'll see a school, a convent, and of course the Basilica all the way at the end of the next block. Historically significant, the Basilica has always been for us here. The Basilica was the first to establish a school for black children here in the Florida Keys. Still a school on the property, of course, these days it is all welcome. There is a convent as well, and during the Spanish-American War, the Mother Superior at the time offered the military to use the convent as a convent hospital. She also offered the services of the sisters to act as nurses. Altogether, they took care of well over 500 injured soldiers. Located on our right behind that stone wall. On our right, there's that school. Through the trees, you see the convent. We'll see the Basilica at the end of the block. Now, in 1919, there was a sister living in the convent here. Her name was Sister Louise Gabrielle. Sister Louise had suffered through 3 very devastating hurricanes in her time here, and well, she wanted to do something. So, looking to our right, all the way to the back of the property, there is Sister Louise Gabriel's prayer grotto, still standing after 100 years. With each coral rock she placed on the grotto, she said a little prayer that Key West would never again suffer the devastation of a major hurricane. She finished the grotto in 1922, and since 1919, no eye of a major hurricane has passed over the city of Key West. Is that coincidence? Is that divine intervention? I will let you decide. Now, folks, just in case you may have already forgotten, you're now riding the world-famous Conch Tour Train, riding the streets of Key West, Florida since the year 1958. The Conch Tour Train was founded by Bill and Olive Kroll. Bill and Olive Kroll were the managers of the Key West Aquarium here for 10 years. Guess of theirs is where I'm used to ask them all the time. What are our other sightseeing opportunities? Not being very many, they founded the Conch Tour Train. January 18th of 1958, engine number 97 started riding down the streets of Key West, Florida. In 1971, the Krolls decided to sell and travel the world. We are now owned and operated by Historic Tours of America, our nation's storyteller. Coming up at the end of this block on the right, you see a stone building on the corner. This is the Old Antique Firehouse Museum. And once we are right in front, look above the tall arched doorways, you will see the number 3. This was fire station number 3, one of the oldest in South Florida. Now, folks, they started to build this building in 1907. It did not open as a firehouse until 1908 because the first one burned down. It's now an antique firehouse museum, fun for the kids to climb around the antique fire equipment inside. All right, everyone, for the next 2 blocks, I have a quiet zone. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves. I will be back with you in 2 blocks. That neighborhood doesn't like me. Now everyone, the island of Key West has been known by a few different names over the course of history. Back in 1522, when the original Spanish explorers landed on this island, and of course they were exploring with constant daily of the legendary Fountain of Youth. The Spanish found this island covered in human bones. They were most likely the bones of fallen warriors from the Native American tribes that lived in this area at the time. So the Spanish called this island Cayo Hueso. Cayo meaning island and Hueso meaning bone, so it was Bone Island, or Island of Bones. And over time, Cayo Hueso got corrupted into Key West. Alright folks, through this intersection we will be approaching a very important thoroughfare for us on this island. We will be approaching Flagler Avenue. It is named for Henry Flagler. Henry Flagler was instrumental in making Key West the place that it is even today. Now, Henry Flagler was business partners of John D. Rockefeller. Together they started Standard Oil, these days known a little better as ExxonMobil. Now, Flagler took the fortune that he made from the oil company and he built a railroad. It was called the Florida East Coast Railway. It initially extended from Jacksonville to Miami. It ultimately was extended all the way down here to Key West. Now, that railway no longer exists today. You'll hear about what happened to the railway along your tour. But all along this railway, Henry Flagler wanted first-rate accommodations for his rail passengers. On our right is the most recent. This is the Casa Marina Resort and Hotel. Casa Marina meaning house by the sea. It opened on New Year's Eve of 1920. And when the Casa Marina first opened, room rates were outrageous. They were $8 to $12 a night. But that included 3 meals. Little consolation there, I suppose. All right, folks, we're going to see what we get around the corner here. You might have had, maybe you deal with this on the cruise ship. There's a huge sargassum bloom out in the Atlantic this summer, so it all collects here in Key West, I promise you. You'll see it all as we get around the corner here. So yeah, we're not going to, if it smells horrible, I apologize. We'll get past it in a moment. So the beach we are facing is one of the few beaches that we do actually have on this island. This is Clarence Memorial Beach. It was a local politician that named the beach in honor of him. And on the body of water on our right after the turn we call the Atlantic Ocean, but technically it's not. These are the Florida Straits, or Straits of Florida. They extend 170 miles between Miami and the dry Tortugas, 90 miles between Key West and the island nation of Cuba to our right. Now there's a bit of wind today, folks, so yeah, the water is a bit choppy. But normally looking out on this huge body of water is like looking at a flat pane of glass, not even a single ripple out there. And the reason for this, about 5 miles off the coast, about as far as you can see, there is a coral reef. It's the 3rd largest coral reef in the world. The 2nd largest one is in Belize. The largest, of course, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. Now that coral reef out there acts as a barrier as well, and it stops all wave activity. And so because of that, we create no natural sand here. No surf, no sand. All the sand that you find on our beaches is imported. It usually comes from either the Bahamas or the Panhandle of Florida. The red brick structure on our right is one of 3 Civil War forts on this island. That is the Fort West Martello Tower, these days the home of the Key West Garden Club. That fort dates from the 1850s and 1860s. However, it was never actually completed. It was deemed obsolete by the end of the Civil War due to the invention of rifle cannons. That's why now it looks a little beaten up. It was purposefully built 1.5 miles away from Fort Zachary Taylor. 1.5 miles is the approximate distance a cannonball can fly. So when they decided not to use it as a fort, they decided to use it for target practice. Shot some cannonballs at it, beat it up a little bit. Now folks, I mentioned that coral reef is also responsible for an incredible industry we had here during the 17 and 1800s. This industry was known as shipwrecking. During those days, the entire beach area at this end of the island would have been lined with very tall wooden watchtowers. At the top of those towers, there would have been people watching to see if and when a wooden cargo ship got wrecked on that coral reef. Now, this is something that happened often enough, at least once a week or so. A wooden cargo ship is no match for a coral reef. Now, if this happened, the people on top of those towers would call out the call, "Wreck ashore." This call would be passed from one tower to the next, finally making its way into the city. Soon, everybody would have realized that we had indeed had a shipwreck. Well, at that point, it became a race. First priority certainly would be to save any survivors from the shipwreck. But next, the first boat captain to arrive at the wreck site was known as the wreck captain. The wreck captain was entitled to the largest portion of proceeds from the auction of salvaged shipwrecked goods. The rest of the proceeds from that auction were then just split among the people of Key West. So, just by living here, you became very wealthy by this industry known as shipwrecking. 17 and 1800s, Key West was one of the wealthiest cities in the United States for this reason. Luckily, or not so luckily, depending on how you wish to look at it, shipwrecking did end. That coral reef got better mapped out. There were better shipping charts. That and the fact that there were many lawsuits at the time claiming that shipwrecking was essentially legalized piracy. Shipwrecking did end. The last auction for shipwrecked goods happened here in 1921. Happened at what's now the Mel Fisher Maritime Museum near Mallory Square. This building coming up on our left here, folks, is now our City Hall, but it was built in 1925 as our Key West High School. Once we are closer to the corner right here, looking to the left, you'll see a metal tiger. At the time, the mascot was the tiger. You'll see it here at the corner. That was an art project of the Industrial Arts Class here in the year 1950. I've not yet been close enough to see for sure, but they tell us that the teeth were made from spark plugs. Folks, we're now traveling along White Street. At one time, White Street was the outer boundary of the island of Key West. Everything here on our right, this is all landfill. This used to be very shallow swampland, but when the Navy arrived in the 40s, they wanted more land to build on. So, they started dredging the water off the keys, came up with a substance they called marl, spelled M-A-R-L. It was a combination of limestone, coral, sand, even seashell. They used it all as landfill, more land to build on. And that's why what we call here on our right, folks, is Newtown, Key West. It is relatively new. At our next intersection, we will be entering yet another very Cuban neighborhood on this island. Across the street on the left with the red and white striped awning, this is a very popular Cuban coffee shop here. This is Sandy's Cafe. And once we're right in front, look at the sign. They say that this is the home of the original Cuban sandwich. All I can tell you is that's the home of my absolute favorite Cuban sandwich. Give the Cuban sandwich a try while you are here. It is great. I also do suggest giving our Cuban coffee a try. I won't say it's not strong. It really is. My favorite is the Cafe Con Leche, the coffee with steamed milk. There are now 4 locations of yet another very popular Cuban coffee shop here. It's called the Cuban Coffee Queen. Their original location is located right in our historic seaport area. A more recently opened location is located right inside the shops at Mallory Square. Give it a try, Cuban Coffee Queen. Their motto is drink more Cuban coffee, do stupid things faster. We're going to cross over Truman Avenue one more time here in just a moment, and after that, coming up on our left, you see a row of houses over there, 5 or 6 of them in the row. They all look the exact same. We call these houses shotgun houses. They were originally built for Cuban cigar workers. On our way in a moment. Shotgun houses on our left. All the rooms inside are connected by one common corridor. The front doors and the back doors line up perfectly. Is that if you were to shoot a shotgun down that hallway, you would not hit a thing. They were built that way for ventilation purposes. Something else you notice about our houses in Old Town, look up at the roofs. You notice that they are all made of metal. There are a couple of reasons for that. Folks, we are on an island surrounded by salt water. So originally, the only available fresh drinking water here was collected rainwater. Those metal roofs really facilitated the collection of the rainwater for drinking. You notice many houses in Old Town still have the gutters on the side of the house. Well, those gutters used to lead to very large cisterns all the way up back to collect the rainwater for drinking. Well, in the 1940s, Navy personnel here increased to 15,000. The Navy decided, wow, we need a whole lot more fresh drinking water. So the Navy built a 120-mile water pipeline all the way down here to Key West from mainland Florida. To this day, that water pipeline is still where Key West gets all of its fresh drinking water. Thank you, Navy. Now back to those metal roofs. You'll also notice our houses in Old Town are really quite close together. 6, 7, 8 feet between our houses at times. Well, that proved to be very problematic during the Great Fire of 1886. Now, certainly the roofs were originally made of wood. Well, a fire broke out at 10 a.m. on March 30th of 1886. That fire burned for 12 hours straight, and it destroyed 50% of the seaport area of Key West. Well, after that fire, the city then mandated all roofs needed to be made of metal. If a fire were ever to break out again, that fire would not spread nearly as quickly. Hence, our metal roofs here in Old Town. Looking to our left, yeah, here we are at our Key West Cemetery. And similar to cemeteries you may have seen if you ever did visit the city of New Orleans, all of our crypts are above ground. There's a very good reason for that. Folks, we are on a chunk of coral and limestone. It's really not so easy to blast into the coral and limestone to bury somebody. Much easier to build an above-ground crypt. Actually, quite beautiful, if you ask me. Alright, in a moment we'll turn here on the Southern Street. And once we get around the gift shop at the end of this block on our left called the Soul House, I'd like you to look at the two houses immediately behind the Soul House. Specifically, look up at the roof line. There you'll see beautiful hand-carved scroll work. We call this scroll work gingerbread. The gingerbread usually noted something about who lived in the house. First on our left, those are arrowheads, most likely the home of the town blacksmith. Right next door to it, check that out. Actual gingerbread man. Gingerbread, most likely the home of the town baker. There are over 150 different styles of gingerbread on this island, hand carved by shipbuilders using reclaimed wood from all of the shipwrecks out there, due to that coral reef. Additionally, many of the houses in this neighborhood were also built using reclaimed wood from those shipwrecks. Built in a very affluent time period for the island of Key West. Mid-1800s, all three of our main industries still in full swing. Shipwrecking, tobacco, and sponging. Well, as I mentioned, yes, all three of those industries did ultimately meet their demise. They did all come to an end. And what's up next? Stock market crash, 1929, the beginning of the Great Depression. Of course, Key West was not immune to the effects of the Great Depression. At that time, 80% of the population here was on some form of public assistance. Well, Key West reached out to the Roosevelt administration looking for some help. Roosevelt looked at Key West and said, well, you got that new railroad, got some pretty nice weather happening down there. Let's give an industry its John Simonton, considered one of the four founding fathers of Key West. Now, John Simonton was really the first American sole owner of this island. He purchased it in 1821 from Juan Pablo Salas. Juan Pablo Salas was a Spanish army officer stationed up in St. Augustine, Florida. Salas was given this island, a land grant to him, sort of a thank you for his service to the Spanish army. Well, in 1821, all of Florida was ceded to the newly formed United States, so Salas decided to sell his island. He sold it to John Simonton for $2,000 in pesos. This happened in Havana, Cuba. But what Salas did not tell Simonton is that he had also sold this island to 3 other people. Well, it took an act of Congress to award this island in its entirety to John Simonton. Simonton noted his knowledge of the Deepwater Harbor here, also the proximity of the shipping lane. Not only that, he promised 25% of this island to our U.S. Navy. Congress could not pass up that very generous offer, so they awarded this island in its entirety to John Simonton, one of our 4 founding fathers. Alright folks, through this next intersection, at the end of the next block on our left, down on that far corner, you'll see a building that factors into Ernest Hemingway's stay on this island. Alright, at the end of this block on our left, you'll see a tad building with some dark brown trim. These days, the first floor is the Key West Room Escape, but in the year 1926, the first floor was the Trentmore Ford car dealership. 1926, Ernest Hemingway was making his way back to the United States from his stay in Paris, France. He stopped here at the end of the block in the tan building with the dark brown trim. Dealership, yes. Yeah, Hemingway stopped here to pick up that Ford automobile. It was a Ford Model A Roadster, but that automobile was 7 weeks late arriving. So Hemingway and his second wife, Pauline, stayed in a hotel above the dealership right there. It was called the Casa Antigua Hotel. Well, sitting around 7 weeks waiting for that car to show up, Hemingway and Pauline fell madly in love with the island of Key West. They decided to make this their permanent home in the year 1931. And it said that when Hemingway was staying there at the Casa Antigua Hotel, he completed the first draft of A Farewell to Arms. Alright, once we make it through our next intersection, at the end of the next block, all the way down on that far corner on our right, you will see a red brick building. That red brick building is the former Curry Tobacco Warehouse. It's one of the few structures to survive the Great Fire of 1886. Old Curry Tobacco Warehouse, end of the block on our right. Well, these days, the building is the Hemingway Rum Company's Papa's Pilar Distillery. They distill 5 varieties of rum inside those walls. It is open every day until 5 p.m. My favorite aspect of that rum, besides the rum itself, of course, is the bottle. Very interesting bottling. You'll see a bottle, the bottle on the corner of the building here on our right. The bottle is fashioned after Ernest Hemingway's World War I water canteen. Pilar was the name of Ernest Hemingway's boat. It was also his nickname for his second wife, Pauline, who lived here in Key West, Pilar. Coming up at the end of this block on our right, see a tan building with some green trim. Inside that building is yet another rum distillery. It's called Key West's first legal rum distillery. Open every day until 6 p.m. They give free tastings and tours. But once we are next to the building, looking to our right and above the doorway, you'll see a sign that reads, Bottling Court. Folks, the building on our right is an old Coca-Cola bottling plant. In the year 1902, Cuba gained its independence from Spain. What was a very popular drink then The Cuba Libre, the free Cuba, also known as a rum and coke. Well, there was plenty of rum in these parts, lots of rum to go around. There was not for that much Coca-Cola. So rather than ship the Coca-Cola to Key West in Cuba from Atlanta, Georgia, the Coca-Cola company put the bottling plant back there on that corner. It was in operation until the year 1971. And as I mentioned, folks, at the time, the only available fresh drinking water here was collected rainwater. So when it did not rain here in Key West, there was no Coca-Cola being bottled at that plant. Alright, here we'll shortly turn on to world-famous Duval Street. It is named for William Duval. He was the first civilian territorial governor of the state of Florida. On our left for that moment, but coming up on our right after the turn, look at this beautiful tan and red brick building right on the corner. From 1891, this is the old Cuban Bank. As I mentioned, in the mid-1800s, this island had a huge influx of Cuban immigrants. They came here to work in that cigar manufacturing industry. Well, many of these Cuban immigrants became very, very wealthy. They did not at all trust the American banking system, so they established their own bank, built this building on our right. And I bet that the founders of that bank today would turn over in their graves to know it is now a t-shirt shop. To our next intersection on the left, one of the most iconic landmarks of Key West. There is Sloppy Joe's Bar, favorite watering hole of Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway is the proprietor. Sloppy Joe Russell were drinking buddies and fishing buddies. Many just wanted to go fishing. Now this is not the original location of Sloppy Joe's. Once you're in the intersection, look to your right, halfway down the block on the left, see a yellow bar, Captain Tony's Saloon. Captain Tony's was the original Sloppy Joe's. Instead, Sloppy Joe Russell's landlord wanted to increase his rent by $1 a week. He was outraged. One night he encouraged his bar patrons to pick up their drinks, pick up their bar stools, and they marched them all the way down there to that location, now behind us on our left. It's been there since 1937. Just gearing up for the night, but as you can see, lots of bars at this edge of Duval Street. At one time, there were 117 bars on Duval Street alone. Going into we have a track of one on top of another. Look at the example on our right. See, the bottom bar is the Bull. Second floor is the Whistle Bar. Up on the roof is another bar called the Garden of Eden. Now, the Garden of Eden is a clothing optional bar in case anyone is interested. All independently owned and established operations. Coming up on our right, you'll see a White House. It's the one with the very large front porch. Dating from 1829. This house is the oldest house in Key West. It was lived in by a Captain Francis Watlington, his wife, and their 9 daughters. One bathroom. Can you imagine? Diagonally through this intersection on our left, see a tall, beautiful white church. This is St. Paul's Episcopal Church, the oldest Episcopal parish in the Florida Keys. This is version 4.0 of St. Paul's. It dates from 1919. Now impossible to see from the outside because they recently boarded them up for a refurbishment. But from the inside, you see absolutely beautiful Tiffany stained glass windows. They are insured for millions. Or to scroll through St. Paul's to see. On our right, see this tall big hotel. This is the La Concha Hotel. At one point, the La Concha was the skyscraper of Key West, all 7 stories of it. It opened in 1926 at a cost of $900,000. Tennessee Williams stayed here. He rented out the entire top floor while he completed a streetcar named Desire. Through our next intersection, halfway down the block on our right, see the pink building with the pink sign out front. That pink sign reads Margaritaville. Well, now that one's really for the gift shop, but just beyond the pink sign, you'll see Jimmy Buffett's original Margaritaville Cafe. Inside Margaritaville today, you can still get a cheeseburger in paradise, and you can change your attitude with a change in latitude. 2 doors down from Margaritaville, see the building with the columns out front. That is the San Carlos Institute, established in 1871. Cuban patriots, including Jose Marti, would gather there to conspire for Cuban independence from Spain. Now it is said that the Great Fire of 1886 started in that building. Oddly, that fire was reported in Cuban newspapers the day before it happened. Now, there's a mystery. Alright folks, we'll turn right here down Southern Street. Our next stop will be all the way at the end of the block that we turn onto here. Last building on the left after the turn. You'll see another very iconic landmark of Key West. You will see the Green Parrot Bar, very much a world-renowned music venue at this point as well. Now the building, last one coming up on our left, opened in 1890 as a grocery store. A man by the name of Anthony Sanchez opened that grocery. Sanchez's friends and family would come by with their instruments. They'd have impromptu jam sessions inside the grocery. They realized it functioned very nicely as a neighborhood music venue as well. Been that way ever since. The Green Parrot, end of the block on the left. In the 1940s, it was a popular military hangout known as the Brown Derby Bar. But since 1982, it's been very much like what we see on our left. Now, folks, they say here, on the weekends especially, the movie really spills out onto the street. As we pass by, look in the windows. You see some iron fixtures in the windows. The fixtures are there not to keep people from getting in. They are there to keep people from falling out. People do some breaking in those windows, I've been told. On our left is Jackson Square, named for Andrew Jackson. He was president of the United States when Key West was incorporated. But at the end of Jackson Square on our left, look at this beautiful tree. This is a kapok tree. They do very well on this island because look at those roots. They are called buttresses. They can extend 100 feet into the ground, perfect for withstanding hurricanes. The seed pods of the kapok tree are buoyant. They were originally used to fill life jackets. Alright, we're going to turn here onto Fleming Street. It is named for John Fleming, considered another one of the four founding fathers of Key West. Now, I'm going to get back to John Fleming in a moment. There's something I'd like to throw in first because I like ghost stories. On our right is a guest house, the White House with the orange shutters. This is the Marrero Guest Mansion, former residence of Francisco Marrero. Now, Francisco Marrero was able to bribe his way out of a Cuban prison in 1889. He made his way here to Key West and became, guess what? A very successful, very wealthy cigar manufacturer. He married a woman named Enriqueta. They lived together in that house with their 8 children. Well, mysteriously, quite unfortunately, Francisco Marrero did pass away on a business trip back to Havana, Cuba. Most people agreed, yeah, he had been poisoned. Well, it seemed at the time that Enriqueta and those 8 children were set to inherit his incredible wealth. Well, that was until Marrero's first wife from Cuba arrived here in Key West. The first wife that he kinda forgot to divorce. Well, yeah, the court here did award all of his wealth to his first wife from Cuba, and she threw Enriqueta and those 8 children penniless out onto the streets of Key West. They say to this day the ghost of Enriqueta Marrero still haunts that house that she once loved and called her home. Folks, if you like ghost stories, check out our nighttime tour here in Key West. It's called Ghosts and Gravestones. I know this is something for your next trip back to Key West. I know you're heading out on a cruise ship. Next time to come back to Key West, check out Ghosts and Gravestones. They say Key West really is a very haunted city. We are surrounded by water. They say spirits cannot cross over water, so anything that dies in Key West stays in Key West. Now, folks, here we are on Fleming Street. It is named for John Fleming, considered another one of the 4 founding fathers of Key West. Now, John Fleming is buried in the cemetery behind St. Paul's Episcopal Church, and legend had it that nightly his tomb would open up, he would wander around that graveyard, just keeping an eye on things. Other people said, nope, that was just a goat grazing back there. On our right, you see the big building. This is the Monroe County Public Library, Key West branch, one of the oldest public libraries in South Florida. But we here on this island affectionately call this library Jimmy Buffett's office. Jimmy Buffett used to hang around inside that library in the air conditioning, booking his music gigs around town. Monroe County Public Library, also known here as Jimmy Buffett's office. Now, folks, I mentioned our three main industries that we once had on this island, all come and gone: shipwrecking, tobacco, and sponging. Well, the neighborhood we've now entered factors predominantly into our sponging industry. Through our next intersection on the left, across the street, just past the building right on the corner, you'll see a building behind that one, a large white building with a very large blue awning out front. These days it is a lawn event. These days it is the home of an event planner. But in the year 1889, the building on the left with the blue awning was the sponge warehouse. All sponges were collected and processed right here. Folks, they tell me that this building has a decided tilt to it. I can never quite see that it's tilted. Let me know if it looks tilted to you. They say it was tilted during the great hurricane of 1909. Yeah, that's the old sponge warehouse. Back in the 1800s, sponges became quite prominent across the planet for their many household uses. At that time, the entire seabed off the coast of the Keys was covered with natural sea sponges. Fishermen with long poles would go out there, they would pluck those sponges off the seabed, bring them back to Key West, clean them up, dry them out, ship them to destinations across the planet. What happened? We had what's known as a red tide. We had one not so many years ago here in the Keys as well. What's a red tide? It's essentially a microorganism that causes the water to turn red, and with that, sunlight could not reach the seabed. Our sponges died. We still have a small sponging business here in the Keys. You can still pick up a natural sea sponge at the sponge market in Mallory Square, but it's not the industry that it was for us during the 1800s. All right, through this intersection on our right, look at this beautiful house on that corner. One of my absolute favorites here. And look up at that roof line. See that hand-carved scroll work, or gingerbread if you will? Those are ship captain's wheels. This house obviously originally built for a ship's captain. But in the year 1906, this house became the Cuban consulate. 1902, Cuba gained its independence from Spain. They hired Antonio Diaz y Carrasco to be the first Cuban consul to the United States, and he set up his office right here in Key West, in this house across the street on the right. Antonio Diaz y Carrasco, still considered quite the hero to the people of Cuba. He is now buried in our Key West cemetery. Still to this day, his gravesite is daily strewn with flowers. Antonio Diaz y Carrasco, first Cuban consul to the United States. Alright folks, once we are in the intersection straight ahead, look to your right all the way to the end of the street. At the end of the street to the right is Duval Point. Trumbull Point all the way down to our right. Well, we today cannot access Trumbull Point. Trumbull Point is now on the grounds of a Coast Guard base. But Trumbull Point was the terminus of Henry Flagler's overseas railroad extension here into Key West. January of 1912, Henry Flagler arrived in the first car of its overseas railroad extension here. The celebration was so great it lasted over a week. Key West was finally connected to mainland Florida and the rest of the continental United States. Unfortunately, that railroad was entirely destroyed by the Great Labor Day Hurricane of 1935. Fortunately, however, that railroad was replaced by the overseas highway. Car traffic in and out of Key West. I will swing through our historic seaport area of Key West. Many fine seafood restaurants in this neighborhood. In the 1700s and 1800s, this area was the center of both our sponging and shrimping industries. That shrimping industry has since moved up to Stock Island. That is the next island up the Keys, so named for the stockyards that used to be there. On our right, hiding beneath the tree at the moment, I mentioned this earlier in your tour. On our right, the original Cuban coffee queen. Yeah, get yourself some Cuban coffee while you are here. It is great.
I remember it was really good too.
Yeah, I love to stay in line right there.
Coming up on our right, you see a gigantic mural. It's on the back of what is now the Waterfront Brewery. This is known as a whaling wall. It was painted by renowned local artist Robert Wyland with a little help from another renowned local artist by the name of Guy Harvey. There are over 100 whaling walls painted across the planet. This one here is number 52, and if you look closely, you will notice there's not a single whale in the mural. Whales aren't that prevalent off the coast of the Keys. Looking off in the distance on our right, tall white bar over there, that is the Schooner Wharf Bar. They like to call themselves a last little piece of old Key West. That's a very popular bar with the locals. They call themselves the Breakfast Club. Happy hour at the Schooner Wharf is the earliest on the island. It starts at 7 a.m. Through this intersection on our left, tall white building with the large red door shutters. Up to 1969, this was a bar known as the Red Doors Tavern, but locally called the Bucket of Blood for the many fights that happened in there nightly. It said if you arrived at the Red Doors Tavern, you would be asked if you were carrying a weapon. If the answer was no, they would give you one. That is true, they wanted to keep the fight fair, and these days, it's a ladies' boutique. Folks, we are now traveling along Caroline Street. Caroline Street, also notorious, from a Jimmy Buffett song from 1976 entitled Woman Going Crazy on Caroline Street. Listen to that song, pay attention to those lyrics, you will understand that that woman's profession was the oldest. Alright folks, at this point sometimes I switch it up and ask you all a question. Folks, have you been in town long enough to see chickens and roosters? Well, yeah, you can't miss them, they're everywhere, but people are always very curious. They ask us all the time, how are they here? What's the story with the chickens and the roosters? Well, cockfighting is very much a part of Cuban culture. When the Cuban immigrants came to this island, of course, they brought this part of their culture with them. There were many hidden cockfighting rings on this island. But in 1902, Teddy Roosevelt named all of the Keys a wildlife refuge and bird sanctuary. Well, chickens are birds, so they became protected. So the cockfighting rings just let the chickens go. Let them loose, set them free, so the chickens you see racing around town now, they are descendants of those original Cuban cockfighting chickens. And yes, folks, they are still protected. Do not bother them. If you do, you'll be written a ticket for around $500. Not recommended. On our right, you see a beautiful Georgian Revival mansion refurbished back in 1906. These days, it's a guest house. On our right, the Curry Mansion, former residence of Captain William Curry. Captain Curry sailed himself to Key West from the Bahamas in 1837 at the ripe old age of 16. He amassed a huge amount of wealth in the shipwrecking and tobacco industries, became Florida's first millionaire. At the time of his death in 1898, he was one of the richest men in the country. He left all that wealth to his 9 children. They built their own Curry mansions on this island. We've seen a number of them along the tour. In this intersection on our left, you see a green and white house on the corner over there. That house is the birthplace of Dr. Joseph Yates Porter. Dr. Porter was Florida's first health official. He did extensive research into the causes of, which eventually led to the eradication of yellow fever. Dr. Porter was born in 1847 in one of the 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor of that house. He died in that exact same room exactly 80 years later to the day. Alright, coming up at the end of this block on our left, down in the far corner, you see a white house with some blue shutters. The house on the left corner is the birthplace of Pan American Airways. This is our floor of that brick building is our brand new Key West cooking show. Yes, it is a cooking show, but it really is so much more. On the second floor there is also a bar. It is called Bar 1, open until 9 p.m. And at that bar you get your Key West cooking and fire bar life. You can drop a cocktail for mojito, rum punch, margarita, happy hour, between 4 and 6, all of that at night. But I also love to let people know that inside that bar from that cooking show, that's where you can get your key lime pie. They have fantastic homemade key lime pie inside that bar from that cooking show. Shouldn't come to the Florida Keys and not get some key lime pie. And just in case, I do have some on for $2 off your slice of key lime pie from that cooking show. If you're interested, I have them here up front. Alright, we'll swing this train around and bring it to a stop inside Mallory Square to conclude your tour. But I've got a couple more things to tell you about pulling into Mallory Square. Alright folks, straight ahead after the turn is the Mallory Dock. Now again, this is something for your next trip back to Key West, but that's the start of our nightly sunset celebrations here in Key West. Not only do you see the sun, which is usually quite spectacular, but you see many street performers. Everybody's favorite is the guy who is trained as cats to jump through hoops. But there's a girl that spins fire. There are unicyclists, jugglers, all kinds of mayhem. That celebration starts 1 hour before sunset every night. So these days it starts about 7 o'clock for sunset, about 8 o'clock, somewhere in that neighborhood, kind of around there. And now, folks, straight ahead inside that same brick building, now behind the Conch Train stand. Inside that brick building is a beautiful handcrafted artisans ball. Beautiful handcrafted artworks inside that ball. Also, folks, the nicest, closest restrooms are on the second floor of that ball, just in case. Ladies. Alright. Alright, everybody, yeah, nicest, closest restroom, second floor of the mall over there, just past the entrance square. Alright, everybody, I want to thank you for spending some of your morning with me. My name is Patrick. Thanks for joining us here in Key West. Any questions, I'll be right here at the front of the train to answer them for you. Again, if you'd like to save yourself $2 off your slice of key lime pie from the cooking show, or $1 off your entrance to the Shipwreck Treasures Museum right here on our left, I have coupons up here for that as well. Again, folks, I'll be any questions, I'll be right at the front, but have a great rest of your
Yeah. Come on. Hey, yeah. Come on. Our knees don't bend like they used to do. Roller coasters, man, we're through, but we're alive and we're free. Got the open road, just waiting to see. We don't need the thrills, we got what we feel. Rock, rock, rockin' in retirement. Cruise, cruise, living like we mean it. Sand between our toes and the wind in our face. Rock, rock, we own this place. Yeah. Barefoot walking down the shore. Taste the salt, we want more. 50 miles an hour, pedal down. Sunset burning over this town. No lines to wait, no price to pay. Rock, rock, rockin' in retirement. Cruise, cruise, living like we mean it. Sand between our toes and the wind in our face. Rock, rock, we own this place. They said, slow down, we said no. Youth's a trip, but watch us glow. Best years now, you better believe. We're just getting started, don't you leave. The RV's parked where the pelicans die. Radio playing 74 keeps us alive. Your hand on my knee at the red light. Map on the dash, no destination. destination inside. No